Well, kia ora everyone. My name is Mike Casey. That was a great intro. I was speaking here last year, and many of you will know me as the electric cherry orchardist from Central Otago. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes on my previous background, just for those that might not have heard my story yet. I was a suburban boy in Wellington. I did a computer science degree at university, at the Victoria University of Wellington, before moving to Sydney and spending 12 years there building technology startups. One of which actually ended up being quite successful, which was quite nice, and we sold that in 2019, and it gave my wife Rebecca and I an opportunity to move back to New Zealand, and we moved back here to Central Otago. We were looking for 4-bedroom houses in Wanaka to live in, and what we actually found was a 9-hectare farm with the perfect house for the same price as a 4-bedroom house in Wanaka. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, I love an opportunity, and my wife Rebecca, she's an accountant, she loves a bargain, and didn't take long at all before we had become the newest members of the New Zealand farming community. What do we do with 9 hectares of spare land? Well, we founded Forest Lodge Cherry Orchard. Forest Lodge is a 9,300 tree orchard across 6 hectares that at full production, which we're hoping to hit this year, will produce about 100 tonnes or 10 million cherries. So a really good commercial operation, and many of you in this room will know that we grow the best cherries in the world. But that's actually not what we're known for. What we are known for are the machines behind the cherries that we grow. 21 electric machines. We run a fully electric cherry orchard in Central Otago. That's not a single milliliter of diesel. That's not a single ounce of gas. 21 electric machines. And the numbers which I presented on last year, I'll just put them up here again quickly. We would have spent about $50,000 if we'd done traditionally what every orchardist in New Zealand does, which is run the majority of their machines off diesel. We more than halved that immediately when we switched to electric machines and run off New Zealand's highly renewable national grid. And we almost halve it again when we look at including solar and batteries on our farms. The exciting thing, what I'm here to talk to you about today, is that I actually think there is a real opportunity for farmers to go one step further and become the future power plants of New Zealand. If I'm invited back next year, hopefully I will be reporting on what I'm estimating to be a $10,000 additional revenue stream to my farm, cutting $51,000 in energy costs and now actually generating income. We do this by generating a lot of energy ourselves, storing it in our batteries and exporting it back to the grid when the rest of New Zealand needs it, during those peak periods. For those of you that are interested, we summarised all this. I know a cherry orchardist is highly believable, but he's not as believable as a climate scientist. So I partnered with a climate scientist to put all the paybacks, the figures, the capital costs, revenue, absolutely everything into this Electric Farms report. So I encourage you to go download and have a read of that if you would like to. A lot of details in there. We've had a lot of really, really positive, awesome feedback on that. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is now the economics of energy and the really exciting opportunity we have as farmers to change the game for New Zealand. The economics of our energy system. Now this is a little bit complex, but bear with me, we're going to step through this together. On the right-hand side is the average cost to generate a kilowatt hour of electricity in New Zealand through our large-scale power plants. Now, a kilowatt hour of power, that's a kilowatt is just a unit of measurement, like a kilowatt or a kilogram. After a while, talking about enough, you begin to contextualize sort of what that kind of what it is. Just to give you an example, depending on how efficient your home is, it'll probably consume somewhere between 1 and 4 kilowatts per hour. The most important thing about the cost of generation is that is not what the customer of New Zealand pays, right? That is not what you pay on your electricity bill, and it's certainly not what I pay on my electricity bill. See, the customers in New Zealand also have to pay for all the poles and wires that connect their homes to the power plants. That's the big national transmission lines that run up and down the country. We pay 2.2 cents for that. That is the distribution lines that run down our roads all the way to our homes. There's also a bunch of other costs involved in this as well, which means the average New Zealander is now paying 34 cents per kilowatt hour for what we call the delivered cost of energy. This is the energy that can actually be delivered to their homes. We find ourselves in a really remarkable situation now because when you spread the cost of solar panels over their expected lifetime of 25 years with the expected solar hours in New Zealand, we are looking at about 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour for every kilowatt hour we generate on our rooftops, right? And if you put that on your mortgage and you finance that at the average finance rate over the last, I think, 15 years, we're looking at about 11.5 cents, a third of the cost of the grid. Isn't this a remarkable situation that we now find ourselves in, where it has become cheaper for us to generate a kilowatt hour on our own rooftops and store it in a battery than it is to buy it from the New Zealand National Grid? Now, both are a lot cheaper than diesel. It costs about 75 cents a kilowatt hour to generate a kilowatt hour through the use of diesel. But it is an interesting time. Another really, really good way of thinking about this is that if aliens came to the planet Earth and they loved New Zealand and they gave us a free nuclear fusion power plant in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand and said, free power for everyone, it would still not get to the customer cheaper than their own rooftop solar. Remarkable, right? And this is because the price of everything has literally plummeted in the last couple of years. There's a real new opportunity for the customers of New Zealand, and in particular, I think there's a really big opportunity for farmers. We pay attention to the green line first. What that shows you is the cost per kilowatt hour. If you generate solar on your roof, you use half of it immediately in your fridge with your lights, all of those kinds of things, and the other half you store in a battery. And what that is showing you now, that even that has become cheaper than the grid. Now, some of you who are power nerds like me might have noticed that the Commerce Commission put a draft decision out a couple of weeks ago talking about how all the prices of electricity, delivered electricity to our homes, is going to continue to rise. Well, that's what that looks like. Right? We have plummeting costs of solar and batteries available to the customer, and we have skyrocketing costs for electricity delivered to our homes, right? It's a scary situation that we find ourselves in, and discovering this is what led me to become the CE of Rewiring Aotearoa, because we need a new voice in the market, one for customers that really, really starts to illustrate the economic potential of the new technology to customers and to New Zealanders. So we have the goal of electrifying 10 million fossil fuel machines in New Zealand by 2030. That's everything from the whippersnippers, the weed eaters, the lawnmowers, the cars, the water heaters, the way we cook our food, the way we heat our homes, all the way up to light transport, right? Because if we do this, we are probably on track in New Zealand to become the world's first fully electric economy. Why? Well, because we've hit this economic tipping point. It is now never better for you to buy a fossil fuel machine than an electric machine over the lifetime ownership of that machine. It's a remarkable situation we find ourselves in. Even more interesting is that it's now probably, in many cases, cheaper to finance a new electric machine than it is to continue to run the old fossil fuel machine. Right? Everybody wins in this scenario. I've spoken pretty at length about the economics of the wins. Now let's talk about New Zealand's emissions. This is New Zealand's emissions inventory. Many of you in this room will understand what this looks like. This is the traditional way that we categorise our emissions in traditional sectors. And what it sort of shows you is that, well, agriculture in particular is the real standout. And I think the way that we categorise these emissions is actually really, it creates a lot of division, right? And it creates a lot of division. It makes us go, well, it makes us blame other people for emissions rather than focusing on our own emissions. And so what I challenge everyone in the room to do today is we need to come up with a new narrative on our emissions. And this is something that we've been working on really closely at Rewiring Aotearoa. What if we didn't change these figures, we just moved them around to sort of highlight the easy stuff and the really hard stuff? And if we do that, we start to see a real clear difference in our emissions, right? We have domestic emissions. Those are the emissions created to underpin the lifestyles of New Zealanders, right? And the export emissions, well, that's how New Zealand makes all its money. The export emissions are really, really hard. We still have to deal with them. Don't get me wrong. They're emissions that they're on our books. We have to figure out how to abate those, to solve those. However, there's a win-win opportunity. I'm an orchardist. I love low-hanging fruit. And what better low-hanging fruit than emissions reductions that also save us money? So if we highlight these, right, and we have a look at the makeup of all the small machines across all the different sectors. Now, this is a real guess because we actually don't know exactly how many machines there are. One of the jobs Rewiring is doing at the moment is actually counting those machines, so we know how many there are. But an educated guess would say around about 25%, a quarter of our gross emissions are in small fossil fuel machine use. All right? We pat ourselves on the back for having a highly renewable electricity system while neglecting to admit that 60% of our energy system is machine fossil fuel use. We have a long way to go. We have the same we have the same path to go down as every other country in the world. And the one thing to highlight here is just how expensive the status quo actually is. Us as New Zealanders, we will spend about $15 billion on fossil fuels a year at the pump, and the majority of that money will go overseas to fossil fuel producing nations. All right? Ask yourselves, what would you do with what would New Zealand do with a $15 billion pay rise? That's $15 billion that stays in the pockets of our households, stays within our communities, most importantly, stays within our rural communities, right? I know what Simon from Pure Advantage would do with $15 billion. There is a lot of real opportunity to take a lot of really serious, strong climate action with that money. And the best thing about it all is finally, New Zealand actually has the resources to do this, right? We don't need a 100% renewable electricity grid. We need a 200 to 300% renewable electricity grid, right? 200% if we're looking at replacing all the machines and electrifying everything, and 300% if we're taking into account some of the new industries that are coming to New Zealand, in particular the industries of data centres. But we have some amazing advantages. We have one of the best hydro schemes in the world, right? We have really awesome wind resources, and we have really, really good sunlight hours. We also have 2 million homes where it is now an economic slam dunk to put solar on the roofs. And if 80% of the homes in New Zealand did that, we would add an extra 40% electricity to the New Zealand national grid very, very quickly. But our real superpower is none of that, right? Our real superpower is our 50,000 farms, right? And if our 50,000 farms all put medium-sized solar and battery solutions into the farms, well, that would increase our electricity by a lot. Farmers alone would save $700 million a year on fossil fuels if they electrified their farms. Some of you will be saying, well, that's really hard, but I've done it on my farm. Not all the machines are available to do this yet, but a lot of them are. And the technology is increasing at an alarming rate. We as farmers could contribute a further 60% energy to the New Zealand national grid with what I would consider reasonably modest rollouts of solar and battery systems on our farms. We would keep electricity prices low. Now, this is a brilliant new narrative for farming. Rather than being the climate criminals, which is what we've been touted as, now we're keeping electricity prices low, and now we're helping to decarbonise the rest of New Zealand, right? We would also bolster our energy security. We all saw the alerts that happened about a month ago now when New Zealand nearly ran out of power. We needed more power than we could potentially have supplied. Well, the best option here is to figure out how to get farmers to supply and bolster our energy system, keep our productivity strong, and keep our economy strong. So I'm going to take you on a trip down memory lane to finish off my talk today. This here is the world's first electric house, defined as electric because it was heated with resistive heating, and the hot water was also done with resistive hot water heating. It was in Tauranga, and it's over 120 years old, right? We also had the first ever electric public streetlights in the world, in Reefton in the West Coast. And we also had the world's second ever transmission line, right? That is in Bulladine in the Skippers Canyon area. The relics of it still exist today. It was about 3 kilometres long, and I believe it was used to run, over a hydroelectric scheme, to run a stamping battery in the next gully. We also have the world's first fully electric cherry orchard. But why stop there? Who's going to put their hands up in this room today to become the world's first electric dairy farm? Who's going to create the world's first electric wine? And who's going to create the world's first electric kiwi fruit? We have the technology to do this now, and I'm convinced the first person to do this will save a lot of money in the process. I think we need a new narrative and we need a new strategic direction, one that is fed by our incredible electrical history in this country and one that is bolstered by our farmers. I think our gift to the world is to show them how to electrify everything. Kia ora.